In the winter of 1778, deep in the frozen hills of Pennsylvania, an army was dying, not from bullets, not from cannon fire, from something far quieter and far more dangerous: starvation, disease, and despair. Nearly 2,000 men would perish before spring, not in battle, but in the mud and snow of a camp called Valley Forge. And the strange truth is this: the man who would save what was left of that army wasn't American. He didn't speak English. He'd never fought in the Revolutionary War at all. He arrived in the dead of winter, a stranger from across the ocean, claiming a title that may not have even been entirely true. And within months, he would take a broken, starving, barely armed collection of farmers and shopkeepers into something that could stand toe-to-toe with the most disciplined army on earth. This is the story of how one outsider, through sheer will and an almost obsessive belief in order, may have saved the American Revolution, not with a sword, but with a drill manual. To understand why this man mattered so much, you first have to understand just how desperate things had become. By the winter of 1777, George Washington's Continental Army had retreated into Valley Forge, a rocky, wooded stretch of land chosen more for its defensibility than its comfort. There were no proper barracks. Soldiers built crude log huts with their bare hands, sleeping crowded together for warmth, wrapped in blankets that were often more whole than fabric. Shoes were a luxury few could afford, and it wasn't uncommon to see trails of blood in the snow, left behind by men marching barefoot on frozen ground. Disease spread through the camp with brutal efficiency: typhus, dysentery, pneumonia, killing far more soldiers that winter than any British musket ever could. But hunger and cold weren't the only things threatening to destroy this army. There was a deeper problem, one that didn't show up in casualty reports, but that may have been just as dangerous. The Continental Army had no unified system. Different regiments drilled in different ways, if they drilled at all. Some units followed British-style tactics, others followed vague interpretations of French methods, and many simply followed whatever their local commander happened to believe worked best. In the chaos of an actual battlefield, this meant confusion. Orders that worked for one regiment meant nothing to the one standing next to it. Soldiers didn't know how to reload efficiently, how to maneuver as a unit, or how to defend themselves in the brutal, close-quarters chaos of an 18th-century bayonet charge. Washington knew this, his officers knew this, and they knew that without some kind of transformation, this army wouldn't survive its next major encounter with the British. Valley Forge itself might not be a turning point, but an ending. And then, in late February of 1778, a stranger arrived at camp. He called himself Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and he carried with him letters of recommendation from Benjamin Franklin, written all the way from Paris. He claimed to have served as a lieutenant general in the army of Frederick the Great, one of the most feared military minds in Europe. He arrived dressed sharply, accompanied by an enormous Italian greyhound, speaking almost no English at all. And here's where the story gets complicated, because historians today generally agree that Steuben's resume wasn't entirely accurate. He had served in the Prussian army, yes, but not as a general. His actual rank had been considerably lower, likely a captain. The grand title of Baron may have been exaggerated as well, a clever piece of self-invention designed to make a struggling, unemployed European officer more appealing to a desperate American cause, searching for exactly the kind of expertise he claimed to have. But here's the twist that makes this story so fascinating. Even if his title was inflated, his knowledge was not. Whatever the exact truth of his rank, Steuben understood something the Continental Army desperately needed: the mechanics of European military discipline, drilled down to an almost scientific precision. And Washington, whether he fully believed the Baron's backstory or not, made a decision that would change the course of the war. He gave this foreign stranger authority over the training of his entire army.
What happened next feels almost like a scene from a film. Steuben, unable to speak English, would shout drill commands in German and French, while aides, including a young officer named Hamilton, scrambled to translate his instructions into English on the spot. When his frustration boiled over, which it reportedly did often, Steuben would supposedly curse in multiple languages at once, so furious with the disorganization in front of him that his interpreters could barely keep up. And yet, oddly, the soldiers seemed to respect him for it. Unlike the aloof, aristocratic European officers many of them expected, Steuben got down in the mud with them. He didn't simply issue orders from a distance, he personally demonstrated maneuvers, correcting a soldier's stance with his own hands, showing rather than simply commanding. He didn't try to train the entire army all at once. Instead, he built what he called a model company, roughly 100 men, hand-picked to learn a single standardized system of drill. Once they had mastered it, those men became teachers themselves, spreading the same techniques throughout the rest of the army, regiment by regiment. It was in essence a chain reaction of discipline, deliberately engineered to turn chaos into uniformity. And it wasn't just about marching in straight lines. Steuben overhauled how soldiers used their bayonets in close combat, a skill many Continental soldiers had never properly learned. He redesigned how the camp itself was organized, introducing basic but desperately needed sanitation standards, separating latrines from kitchens, for example, a simple change that likely saved countless lives from disease. He simplified formations so that soldiers could move and reload with far greater speed and coordination. Every piece of it was designed around a single goal: turning individual farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers into a single cohesive fighting force that could move, think, and react as one. By the time spring arrived, something remarkable had happened. This wasn't the same army that had stumbled into Valley Forge that freezing December. Visitors to the camp noted a startling transformation. Men who once shuffled without formation now marched with precision. And the true test came just a few months later, in June of 1778, at the Battle of Monmouth in New Jersey. For the first time in the war, American soldiers held their ground against British regulars in an open field engagement, executing coordinated maneuvers under fire instead of collapsing into disorganized retreat. It wasn't a decisive victory in the traditional sense, but that almost didn't matter. What mattered was that the Continental Army had proven, for the first time, that it could stand and fight as a real, disciplined military force. And many historians point directly back to one freezing winter and one foreign officer with a possibly exaggerated title as the reason why. Baron von Steuben never fired a shot in anger during the American Revolution. He's remembered for something quieter, but arguably just as important: turning a starving, disorganized collection of citizens into an army capable of standing its ground. Perhaps that's the most overlooked lesson of Valley Forge. Sometimes the difference between defeat and victory isn't found on the battlefield at all. Sometimes it's found in the long, freezing months before the battle even begins, in the discipline, the preparation, and the unglamorous work of getting ready, one drill, one freezing morning at a time.